Hello, everyone who is joining us today. My name is Lisa Rabluck, and I'm happy to welcome you to our second Flip the System webinar. We are recording this, so it will be available afterwards. So as everyone's settling in and joining us, we'll just hop right in. So I want to welcome our guest today, Kathryn Cameron, the Chief Operating Officer for Beauceron Security. So Kathryn, it's great to see you again.
Thank you so much for having me. Really excited for the conversation today.
Yeah, so of course, we're talking about integration, economic integration for newcomers, for immigrants, and also just that larger question about building out a labor force here in the Fredericton region. And you and I have had this conversation a few times now. So why don't we start at the very beginning? And you tell us a little bit about Beauceron and how you came to be part of a cybersecurity company.
Yeah, absolutely. So Beauceron Security was actually founded 5 years ago. This month is when we started full-time operations. So about 5 years ago, I actually had a chance to meet one of the co-founders who at the time was working for the University of New Brunswick, David Shipley. He's often seen in the media. He is our cybersecurity expert and guru. So he was running the security program at the University of New Brunswick and realized, technology could only solve the cybersecurity problem so far. Right. What you really needed to do was find a way to engage your team and your workforce to understand how to do their job safely. And most importantly, make them aware of what to do when something goes wrong. So mistakes are going to happen. Anyone can click on a phishing email at any time if it's the right email. So knowing what to do after the fact was really important. And that wasn't going to get solved with technology. That was going to get solved with building a culture, a community, and really engaging the entire team. And so at the time I met David, he had, started building something with his 4 other co-founders, 3 of whom also worked at the university at the time and were trying to help him solve this problem. Another gentleman was a sales and marketing expert who was working for cybersecurity companies and really knew the industry quite well. And I was coming from an HR background. So previously I've held roles in HR, marketing. And so I was looking at this from a change management lens, employee engagement lens of how do you affect change in an organization. Right. And in my first conversation with him, he was looking for someone to join the team that would, at the time, he was 1 full-time employee. So that would help with all of the things business. So customer sales, marketing, all of that stuff. And I was thinking, geez, like my background's in HR. What does that have anything to do with cybersecurity? And as we started talking and I could understand, cybersecurity is really about, at its core, you need to engage people. And so that's where the people-centric side came in and why ultimately I ended up joining the team as the second full-time employee in July of 2017. And that's, where it all started. At the time, we had 5 customers. Now we have about 575 customers around North America, ranging from 10 to 25 employees up to, some of Canada's largest critical infrastructure. So financial to telecom. And that common thread of how do you engage people to be part of that solution is at our core and was always part of the philosophy of an organization, which, really bled into the kind of corporate culture that we intentionally wanted to create at our organization. Because if you're a company talking about empowering people, you got to make sure that you're walking that and able to exemplify that within your own organization as well.
Right. So now this is your first COO position. Yes?
Yes, it is.
So what have been some of your discoveries along this past 5 years as you've been growing this high growth startup?
It's always a journey. I think in the first I joke every quarter my job looks a little bit different, right? As the company has continued to grow, what it means to be in my role has always continued to evolve and shift depending on, who we've got on the team at the time, what our biggest problems are, what are some of the areas that need some extra attention and focus. And so looking at, and the interesting part about a COO position is it's a very unique role. There's not necessarily a standard playbook or standard job description that goes with that position. It really depends on the organization and what kind of CEO the company has. Typically your COO is trying to be very complementary to whatever that your CEO position is. And so the role is very fluid and flexible. And I think that was a bit of a learning curve for me in terms of depending on the size of the company. At 20 people, it meant I was hands-on. I was I still wore an HR hat. I was getting on customer calls. I was doing a lot of that very client-facing work. Mm-hmm. Now at 50, or almost at 50, I should say, I think we're 48 right now. It's very much focused on internal. So how do you build the culture? How do you build the talent pipeline? How do you make sure that every team has the resources it needs? And so there's this constant ebb and flow of, okay, do we need to be really looking at team as a whole? Do I need to be focusing on one specific part of the organization? And I think that's been a really interesting learning experience for me as it's been so fluid over the past couple of years.
Sure. And fluidity, that is, I think, that is the best way to describe the early years of a company, right? You really, you wake up Monday and you've got your plan for the week. And then on Wednesday, you're like, that was a fun little exercise, but now I'm doing this.
Absolutely. There's no playbook for entrepreneurship, right? Like everything is ebbing and flowing, and there's a proactive piece of this is where I want to go. These are the things that I want to make sure we get to and accomplish. And this is the impact we want to have. But how you get there changes very regularly. And so learning how to kind of roll with the punches, as it were, and adapt to those different needs, I think is something that's common across all entrepreneurial type ventures.
Sure, absolutely. So I mean, with your HR background and then this exciting, crazy experience of building a startup, what have you learned about building a team, right? Because you studied it and now you're living it. Like, so how did those two things come together to create whatever it is you're doing with hiring?
Yeah, talent development has been absolutely massive for us. And I think what's been really interesting about trying to build a team is when you add in that context of in tech in Fredericton, there is tons of competition out there right now, right? Yeah, sure. There are lots of startups in Fredericton. There are lots of tech companies. There are lots of large organizations that have development or tech hubs within Fredericton. And so recognizing very early that we had to differentiate ourselves from other companies within the Fredericton region in order to attract talent. And it's all about trying to find the right person and put them in the right role. And so I feel like I recently, my role has been really shifting into focusing on almost like that coach or general manager of what's the gap that we have? How can we fill that? Should our center fielder actually play left field for this reason, right? Like you're kind of moving people around to figure out what's the best winning combination to win the most games. And it's that constant evolution. And sometimes there's a lot of talent development that needs to go into that as well. Recognizing that it is so competitive right now. We're always looking for how can we find people with the right attitude and aptitude and teach whatever those skills might be. So who's hungry to learn? And then how can we get really good at teaching those folks?
And it is fascinating to me how much I'd say, what would you say in the last like 2 years, even maybe three, how coaching has become the preeminent skill for employers to have to bring staff on. It's been fascinating. You know, like I have, first as a journalist and now as an entrepreneur, I have covered labor force issues for, I'm old, over 20 years. I've never heard the word coaching used as often as I hear it now.
And I think when you look at how competitive the job market is right now,
okay,
and how much there is a need for, you know, people who are working in a different industry who are now transitioning into tech or sales or development. Some of those, you know, those are sales and development are two positions that are really, really challenging to fill. And so they often attract people with really diverse backgrounds who may have, you know, been a teacher for a while or been worked in hospitality, or there's just these different backgrounds that now they're transitioning into these new roles because there's so many transferable skills.
Right.
And coaching, making sure that we're able to support people to be successful and trying to really focus and spend the time and energy articulating what are the transferable skills that we need for someone to be successful in this particular role. It's rare that you'll see, you know, must have 4-year degree, must have this certificate.
Right.
It's a lot more common to see good written and verbal communication skills. Someone who, you know, understands Python or Java or whatever it might be. And often we'll use language like a combination of experience or education.
Right.
Because as an employer, we're recognizing that there's so many different paths that people are taking right now to end up in those positions, and trying to really intentionally lower that barrier to entry.
Sure.
So that people who are talented can come into the roles, even if they don't, you know, match that very traditional background.
Right. Right. Yeah, that's really interesting. So now Beauceron has quite a progressive hiring record. So I presume you've done that on purpose. So why?
Yeah, it has absolutely been intentional. I think very early on, we recognized that, and I credit David Shipley from the very first time I met him, talked about how important it was to him personally to bring more women into technology, or underrepresented groups into technology, because cybersecurity as a whole is an industry that is predominantly filled. I think it's like 11% of cybersecurity positions are held by women.
Right.
Some crazy low statistic.
Yeah.
So
it is the land of dudes.
It's the land of dudes, and we're trying to find a way to make it more accessible. And so when you think about, when I speak to looking for people who have those transferable skills, we're really trying to get outside of that box. And when we look at, in particular, our own market of who we're trying to sell and work with, we work with security awareness professionals. Security awareness professionals need communication skills, they need marketing skills, they need change management skills. They also need the technical piece. So they need to have an understanding of the risks of their organizations and how to mitigate that. And oftentimes they may come from a technical background or an HR marketing background. And so having a team that has different experiences to work with that, or to help complement that, or offer new perspectives in that conversation can be a real benefit, both to the customer and us as an organization internally, when they're offering those perspectives on, you know, we're having an event, why don't we do something like this? Why, you know, the Multicultural Association is having this event, like, why don't we go? Like, those are all amazing things that I think having that diverse team just brings out some of those new ideas, rather than, you know, like, we've never had a keg or a ping pong table in our office. That was traditionally part of what it meant
absolutely.
to have culture.
Foosball.
Startup culture, right? Was there's a ping pong table and a keg.
Absolutely. I want to say like 20 years ago during Web 1.0, I went into a tech company. There was a foosball table or there was a ping pong table.
Yeah.
And there was likely like a poster of a pop culture hero like Kramer from Seinfeld framed on the wall. Every time.
Oh, absolutely.
Yeah.
I shouldn't joke too much because we do have an Office Space poster still somewhere in the office. So
which is fine.
There's still pieces that remain. But like that attracts one very specific type of workforce.
Sure.
And that isn't what we're looking for when we're talking about, creating an environment that has a lot of different perspectives and shared core values. You want to make sure that your workplace is inviting and is attractive to people. And so, no one really wants to join an organization. Very few people want to join a company if they are the only female, the only member of an underrepresented group.
I know.
Like that, it just automatically kind of creates a little bit of a barrier. And so trying to find a way and very intentionally from early days, bring people into the organization that could offer different perspectives. Mm-hmm. I think it just sets you up for success in the long term because you don't end up at 50 people looking around and saying, we all look the same. Like that's a problem, or we all have the same background. You look at a company that, if everyone has an engineering degree, they're all work well together because they all probably have a very similar mindset.
Right.
But they're missing that liberal arts balance, or they're missing that different perspectives from different degrees or different backgrounds or different experiences. And so it's really hard to do that once you get past a certain point, like having it be part of your corporate DNA at the beginning. Mm-hmm. Sets you up for success as you continue to grow.
That's awesome. So how do you know then someone's a good fit? What is that? Is it a je ne sais quoi quality, or do you actually know? No, now I know I'm looking for this, and this.
Yeah, and fit is such an interesting topic because I think historically fit has been, we're both engineers, we both like ping pong. Like it's been very they're a cultural fit, which meant they're going to fit into the company well.
Sure.
And so we've looked at it very much from, we don't want that. We don't want everyone to just have the same perspective, but we do want everyone to be coming from the same place. And so we look at it from a core values perspective of how do you really focus on what are the shared values that everyone in the company has?
Sure.
And then how do you define them? So this has evolved over time as our team's gotten bigger. We look at our values and we say, okay, can we get even more specific now? How can we articulate this with, including some of the newer members of the team? What made you join? What makes you feel like Beauceron is unique? How do we capture that essence? And so as difficult as it may be, we do try and have that values. So we're looking at people being authentic. Like, are they truly following through on what they say they're going to do? Are they leading from a place where they're trying to operate with, the team's interest and best at heart? And so asking questions around, tell me about your team experiences in the past. How do you handle conflict? How would you like to handle conflict if that wasn't always, different corporate cultures, maybe different, maybe you can or can't handle conflict in different ways. So trying to really understand that, making sure people are determined. We face lots of challenges on a regular day. I always joke in the interview process, I can offer you a lot of things. There are lots of problems that are here to solve. Structure, we don't have a lot of that, but problems, I've got tons. So opportunities to really expand yourself and challenge yourself. Mm-hmm. I want people who are excited about that. And finally, adaptable. So looking at people who, they can roll with the punches a little bit. We try to provide clarity as much as we can on who's doing what, but recognizing almost half our team has been with us for about a year or less right now.
Sure.
And so with that, we're going through a whole bunch of growing pains. And I know that. And we try to be really upfront with people about that during that interview process, because different people like working in different work environments. And especially if you know that about yourself, of I can thrive in chaos. I don't mind it. I'm happy to figure it out on the go. Whereas others are like, no, I need to know exactly what I'm doing from 8 a.m. to 4.
Yeah,
and,
right.
So those are different types of people, and those are different work environments.
Sure.
And I can't provide, that's that amount of structure for some folks in certain roles. So we're really looking at, are they going to be successful in this ever-changing environment that is a startup?
Sure.
And trying to set them up for success.
Sure. Okay. That's awesome. Well, I'm wondering if anybody in our little audience has any follow-up questions. If not, we can keep chatting.
I have a quick question. Sorry.
Yeah, please.
Okay, so I have one question here. So you said it's your company is a startup, right? So when someone from another company, like a big company, probably a Fortune 500 with more than 2,000, 5,000 employees, joins the company, and they have come from an area where there are set processes, procedures that you have to do this. So how do you handle that? How do you change that mindset, or do you kind of hire those people who have come from bigger companies who probably might not be a good fit, or they probably might be a good fit, but they themselves don't know whether they'll be able to survive in kind of a startup. So how do you differentiate that?
Yeah, that's an excellent question. And it's really interesting when you look at, because there's large companies, but there's also very small companies that operate very, very siloed. The director of finance has the budget, and every $500 spend you want, you need to go and make your case to that director of finance. Or it's a very commanding control of, you have to do these things. And it's a very different culture that we're trying to create, right? Where you have autonomy and decision-making power, and people are really charting their own path. And so for us, what I really want to know from a candidate, if they're applying for a role, is, did you love that structure? Because if so, then we may not be the best company for you. If you were, felt like there was a lot of tape, always wanted to try something new, wanted to, found ways to navigate in that organization and still create some sort of change, you might thrive in a smaller company. So it depends on what an individual is looking for, if they're hungry for that change, or if they really enjoyed that structure. I think we can almost say, well, that's fantastic. We're probably not the best company for you if you really want that clear structure, defined roles. If you're eager for a change and you're up for it, and it's going to be a bit of a challenge, and getting comfortable saying, hey, I don't think we should do the process that way. I think we should change this. Culturally, that's a very big difference between a Fortune 500 company and ours, right? In that kind of an organization, your senior manager, your director, your VP, your C-suite, they may need to sign off on that change before it can actually get affected. Here, it's like, well, try it, see if it works. Let us know if it works. If it didn't work, what did you learn? And so it depends on a candidate's, if they have a little bit of that self-awareness of what are you looking for, and are you willing to put yourself out there and try it.
Thanks for answering that.
And that was a great question, because it occurred to me, because certainly when I talk to people who have emigrated to New Brunswick from elsewhere, particularly if they're coming from large urban centers, wherever, the current trend tends to be from Asia, and a little bit more, a few more from Africa. I'm not forgetting you, Diane. You're right. They would have been working for multinationals. Whereas here in New Brunswick's economy is the flip of that. New Brunswick has a handful of what by Canadian standards we call large companies, but would be small on a multinational stage. We have a few multinationals that we could probably all name with the fingers on one hand. We have a small percentage of mid-sized companies. So we actually have less than what we should have. And we have an abundance of small companies. So if you are moving here from a large city, well, the odds are you wouldn't have been able to afford to move to Canada if you were working for a small company. So yeah, so that's an interesting flip, because it's both, that's a huge culture piece then, right? So it's a double culture piece, because there's just the difference between countries, but then there's a corporate culture shift that is quite different.
Absolutely. And you think about, and I would even say like absolutely between big and small, different small companies operate very differently. And you tie back into, and you look at that leadership style that different organizations take. If you think of that very directive, like, this is exactly what I want you to do, come back to me when it's done, kind of very top-down leadership style. I think a lot of multinational organizations tend to work that way, because they've just got, what's proven, what's processed, what's the strategy, versus small, like a company like ours, where we try and run very anti that in a lot of ways. We try and make sure that, the people closest to the customer can make the best decision for them.
Sure.
And that can be uncomfortable. Like, we've had folks join who have, really struggled with challenging authority and saying, I don't get it right all the time. I make mistakes. Sometimes they have a hard time saying, Kathryn, I think you're wrong. And I want them to, right? I think there's this wonderful thing that can happen when people feel empowered to, push back on, actually, I think we need to do it this way. Or what about this difference? Or what about this change? And so it is a big adjustment, especially from that corporate culture standpoint. I think it goes back to the question of what environment are you looking to thrive in? Are you hoping for something really structured, or are you excited by the idea of having a little bit more, feeling comfortable or confident, challenging a little bit more in that workplace? Obviously, respectfully, based on trust that you've built up with your peers and colleagues. But I think is a very cultural shift, where, especially when we've had folks that have worked in several different companies before us, coming to us after, it's been something we've had to spend some time talking about and coaching on.
Sure. Oh, it's fascinating. It's exciting, but also fascinating. So much learning is happening right now, I think, between both employees and employers in how to build up these companies. I think it's really fascinating what's going on. So congratulations, Kathryn.
Thank you. It's an ongoing challenge, and I think, again, when you add in the lens of the market that we're playing in is very competitive for talent, and it's this ongoing challenge of how can you find people who are going to thrive in this environment, who are really eager to and willing to learn in that kind of an environment. And looking at how do you coach the skills to fill some of those skills gaps, which is part of it. And something I think employers, 5-10 years ago didn't need to consider as much, because it was just a different economic place. Talent competition wasn't as high 10 years ago as it is right now.
Right. What I'm thinking as I'm listening to you and the question we got from our audience member, for well over a decade, we've heard a lot about STEM, so science, technology, engineering, and math. And then we started hearing about STEAM, which threw arts in there. And when we talked about STEAM, we were talking about injecting creativity and new ways of thinking into science and technology, engineering and math. But what I'm actually hearing here is actually a slight twist on that interpretation of that creativity, because and maybe it was just me, when I was listening to that, I was hearing about, oh, there's a role for arts and the creative class in this world, right? Like, so I was hearing that, along with engineers need to start thinking creatively when they're designing stuff, right? So in their actual work that they do. But it's also, I think, the creativity or the fluidity that you talked about at the beginning of this is actually how you work, not just what you work at. And that's almost a harder piece to figure out, because how you work is how you work. Like, quite frankly, if you became an engineer, you became an engineer because you kind of like the way engineering works. Right? If you became a computer scientist, you kind of like the way that goes. So yeah, so like, so here I'm just thinking off the top of my head. So Kathryn, I'm just like, you can say fascinating.
I think it is,
Lisa, or
when you think about that piece of that human dynamics, because it's how we work, but then how we also work together as a group. Right. And how do you bring people with all of those different personality styles, work styles, communication styles? How do you get them working well together? And I am a big fan. I mean, obviously my background's in HR, so organizational behavior and all of that stuff is one of my favorite things to read on. And when I look at, research done by Patrick Lencioni, who's a phenomenal business writer, looking at, how do you build up trust within an organization? The 5 dysfunctions of a team is something that we talk about as a company quite a lot. Different communication styles, how people prefer to be communicated with, and how that can help us work better together. Because there's a cultural layer to that, absolutely. People who are, came from a different country tend to approach conflict in a different way, right? That's just an easy example. Canadians, super polite, typically very conflict averse. We do not like conflict. We like to avoid it. We like to be very polite. Whereas when you work with different cultures, like Germany, for example, like very direct, very much like, this is what I think. This is where I think we should go. And so when you have a conversation between 2 different cultures, and then you layer in somebody's personality and how they're interpreting what's being said, finding a way to share that as openly as you can, so that as a team, you can really come together and say, like, yes, I know you're from this country, and I know we use a thing called birds to describe personality types and communication styles. So I know you're a dove. I know you really, like, you feel deeply. You feel, and you want to make sure that everyone around you is heard and listened to and is bought in. But I'm an eagle, and I like to make decisions, and I like to get things going. So recognizing that,
right,
putting it aside and saying, okay, we know this about each other. Now we can try and have this conversation and be really cognizant and aware of, the other person's perspective, so that you're able to try and do some of that problem solving and get to some of the core problems, instead of just saying, oh yeah, that's okay, that's great, and sweeping them under the rug. Like, I think it takes a pretty strong team to like address some of those conversations or conflict in a very trusting manner. And it's not something we do well all of the time, but it's something that we're trying to be aware of, and we're trying to find ways to do that more.
Yeah, I think David's an eagle.
He's an eagle owl. He likes
Oh
to
yes,
be
okay, yes. Okay. Well, this has been fabulous, Kathryn. Thank you so very much. Beauceron Security is a fabulous company. I suggest everybody check it out. Is it beauceronsecurity.com/careers, probably, if people want to check out the
sounds about right. Yeah.
current job postings. You can follow Kathryn, and we've referred to the CEO David Shipley a few times. Both are very active on social media. Please reach out, get to know them. And with that, I think we bring to a close our second Flip the System, our ongoing conversation about labor force, immigration, and building up the Fredericton economy. So I'm Lisa Rablik, and thank you very much for joining us.